Delighted to welcome you all here this afternoon and to introduce our newest guest in the Professionals in Residence programme. This programme is established to bring into St Cross individuals who've distinguished themselves in fields beyond academia. This place exists. People whose authority comes not just from ideas, but from actual practical experience, from founding companies, from shaping institutions, and leading in complex environments. And this reflects our belief that a graduate community has a lot to learn from those people who have built and carried responsibility in the wider world beyond Oxford University. So the programme's made possible through the generosity of Douglas H. Wigdore, who's a member of our alumni community and whose own professional achievements exemplify the sort of ambition and independence that we like to foster here at St Cross. And we're really grateful for his support, which enables us to continue this initiative and to widen the range of experience available to our students. So it's a particular pleasure to welcome Nick English. As the co-founder of Bremont, Nick has been central to the revival of British mechanical watchmaking. And what began simply as an ambitious idea grew into an internationally recognized company built here in Oxfordshire and grounded in precision engineering and a serious commitment to craft. In a field which is defined by heritage and exacting standards, he and his brother established a modern manufacturing presence while at the same time maintaining traditional technology. And for a graduate community such as our own, where much of our own work demands patience, accuracy, and long-term thinking, there's something recognizable in this story. And building a business from first principles and doing so here locally while operating on a global stage requires both imagination and discipline. So we'll salute your achievements, Nick, and we're very glad to welcome you to St Cross. Over to you.
For having me. Hope you can hear me okay. So here to talk a little bit about building a brand, tell you a little bit about the history of how we got there, and then please do ask any questions you want at the end. I mean, here to answer anything. I mean, a brand is a weird thing. It is a weird thing, and the more you think about it, it is weird. What makes a brand work? What doesn't? And you can't sort of touch a brand. You can't weigh a brand up, and often the most valuable thing in any business is the brand itself. And we always treated Bremont a bit like a sort of living organism. You can, you have to nurture it. You can kill it off very easily. And we saw competition. We sometimes saw changes in our brand that we got worried about. And it's certainly, you need 2 or 3 things to make that brand work. And I'm here to talk about that. So yeah, hopefully I won't bore you too much. And without further ado, I've got this, which hopefully will work. When we started Bremont, it certainly wasn't, because I'm going to tell you a little bit before, pre-Bremont as well, it certainly wasn't my brother and I, Giles, sitting down and going, right, we're going to form a watch brand. It wasn't about that. It's very much about our love of all things mechanical, which ended up turning into a brand. But that brand certainly, at the beginning, you're up against some huge competition. You're up against people that would laugh in the face of your idea. And it took years, a few years to get to the stage when you said, actually, I think we are a brand here. So going back a step or two, very briefly, this is our background. We had a father who actually is at Cambridge. He did aeronautics there, amazing man. Did his PhD there as well. For my sins, I was born and bred Cambridge, but my kids went to school in Oxford, so I feel like I live in Oxfordshire. I have done for the last 20 years, so I've converted. But we had this idyllic childhood he was a mad adventurer. He was a mad engineer. We'd spent the whole time in the workshop with him making things, restoring cars, making boats we sailed around the world in, all these mad things like this. But he had this huge passion for just going out and doing some great things. And our form of cheap childcare was being thrown in the workshop with him as kids. So a mother who was a potter, rather mad potter, she would literally have her workshop there, and then our dad's workshop there, and there we would be placed in with him, and we'd be tinkering. He would talk about things that would inspire adventure in us, and one of his big childhood heroes was this chap. I don't know if you've ever heard of Sir Francis Chichester. For us, it was sort of a bit of a household name. He was the first guy to sort of solo sail a boat around the world. But also he had this mad adventures, you know, in the 1920s. When he was in his 20s, he literally bought this old Gypsy Moth airplane and decided to fly from England to Australia. And it was his adventure on the way. And we'd lived through this mad existence, a bit like him. Yeah, our dad used to talk about this guy, and it had really, really inspired us, and that's what sort of made us tick. So flying became a big, big part of our lives. It was huge. It was we still fly planes today that our father built. We're lucky enough to be this sort of high, and our father would do a lot of air show flying, and we'd go and sit in the back of these airplanes doing these air shows illegally. But nobody could see us because we're too small, so it was okay. And then as we got older, we were lucky enough to do a lot of the flying ourselves. So it was definitely in our blood, and that's what I guess became a big part of the brand later on. And I think when we're based on some of the sort of the pillars of what Bremont was about, flying was a big, big part. So we would go to. Let me just flick the next slide. So we'd go to these air shows, do all this sort of thing, and I always thought I was going to join the RAF. I thought this would be the best thing for me. I went to university. I was at Manchester, and there's a university air squadron which I joined. I thought it was great, and I didn't really do any work, but I flew quite a lot. And I got to the end of I did my finals, and I thought, yes, I'm going to join the Air Force. And then I realized it was a 3-year waiting list to actually fly. And I said to my dad, listen, I'm really not willing to go and wait for 3 years sitting at a desk. What do you think I should do? He said, I've got a great idea. Do something semi-constructive with your life. So I went and became an accountant, which I absolutely loathed. So I trundled off down to London. I joined a company called PwC and learned a lot. Wasn't really my thing. I was just saying to some colleagues earlier, it's one of those rare times. I was clock watching every day. I was be sitting there, getting to work at 9. When's lunchtime? When's supper? Ever since I stopped doing that, never looked to the clock other than, my gosh, I haven't got much time left in the day. So went to do that, and then I basically qualified there, and then our life changed. Does this work? Quite majorly in 1995. So midway, just at the end of my days with Coopers and PwC as it is now, our father called me up and my brother, and he said, listen, it was March 1995. He said, look, it's a beautiful day. Let's go. The air show season's coming up. We're still doing a lot of flying at the weekends and things. Let's go off and get some practice in. So it's great. So Giles and I bundled in the car. We went off to this airfield just north of London, and we took off. My brother was waiting to go on the next flight. I was in this particular flight. Took off my father. I was flying. He was in the back actually this time, and there were 2 of us doing some aerobatics and some other bits and bobs. And then something went wrong with the aircraft, and we ended up crashing. This is the wreck. Our father died in it, and I broke 40-odd bones and smashed myself up quite badly. So I was then airlifted to the Royal London in, where is it? It's in Whitechapel, where I spent a few months still recovering. And that for Giles and I was a bit of a tipping point. He was waiting to take off in the next flight. He'd heard the whole thing over the radio going on in terms of Mayday calls, in terms of your father's dead, your brother's probably not going to make it. I was obviously taken away, and he obviously had to call my mother. She had to then explain. He had to go up, and as she was coming down from Norfolk, he was heading up to tell our little sister, who's 12 years younger, what had happened. It was a really horrible time, and actually we're both in our early 20s, so it sort of had quite a massive impact on us. So I got back to work. I was determined. I had another year of this PwC malarkey to get through. did that, didn't really know what to do next. It's funny enough because our father, who had been your sort of guide, we all have our parents if we're still lucky enough, and they're often a guiding light for us. We didn't have that anymore. So we suddenly had to it was Giles and I, actually would ask each other advice, which was totally hopeless most of the time, but it worked sometimes. I smashed myself up quite badly, so I'm actually half metal, so going off through, for airport detectors and stuff is something else. But I put this up because it makes me laugh, because I didn't really know what to do. I finished this accountancy degree, and I got this offer from this job, which I won't give the company's name, but it can only be described as a company very much like this one here. I don't know if you've seen the film. Have you all seen that film? You've got to if you haven't, but he works for quite a dodgy law firm. This is quite a dodgy corporate finance outfit I was working for. In terms of, it just made me laugh because I'd come from this white and white sort of background at PwC, big accountancy firm, to this company which was, selling very close to one in my view. Anyway, I remember one day my boss, and I'd done about 6 months there, and I was going, oh my gosh, what am I doing? And my brother had got a job at somewhere doing something very similar. And I remember my boss, he was about 25 stone. He was quite a big chap. I remember him coming over to me. I've been working all night. And if you worked all night, you got a free shirt. So it was often worth working night because laundry was also difficult when you were sort of coming out of student days. So you'd get this new shirt. I remember sitting there in the morning, and this guy came over and said, look, this is amazing. I think the guy was on his third wife. He was commuting every day. He wasn't sort of a massive inspiration. And he came over and said, Nick, this is amazing, this work you've done. If you carry on like this, you could be in my job in 10 years' time. And I just looked at him. I thought, oh my gosh, this is not what I want. So I rang my brother up and said, listen, I'm thinking of quitting. And he said, interesting. And literally 20 minutes later, he called me up. And he said, I've quit. I went, oh no, we've just got you a job, Giles. So we both ended up leaving. We got involved with a business, funny enough, restoring historic aircraft, which we did for a bit. And for us, that was therapy. And whilst we did that, we're talking about entrepreneurialism here, we had another business. We call it the Virtue Days. The company was called Virtue Broadcasting. We met this amazing engineer, chap from Sony, and we set up, this was in 1998, so it was very, very early in the internet. You think about now, everything's done online. Back in 1998, there's a postage stamp video over the internet. And we set up this business, and it was during that dot-com crazy phase, a bit like AI is now. It was those sort of years. And we set up this business up, and within a year, there's 80 people working, then there was 100 and something. Then the company floated, and all sorts of stuff. It was a little bit crazy. But we did some quite crazy things to get there. So I put these banks of servers there because it made me laugh. We did we've got these big FTSE 100 companies, and what else do we do? But we did 4 or 5 out of the major record labels, and we'd digitize all the content, we'd distribute it for them, we'd rights manage it, and all sort of geeky stuff. And I just remember one conversation with we're in this basement in just north of Soho, East Castle Street. I remember it so well. And the head of sort of the IT department of EMI said, look, Nick, we've got the boss coming over from America. You've digitized a bit of content for us. You've done a few live concerts. We've got a whole back catalogue to digitize. Will you do it for us? And if you'd seen our office, it was like 1,000 square foot, with one little DVD recorder in the corner doing the content. We could not let them see this. So we said, of course. Well, he's coming over next Tuesday. And this is Thursday. We thought, oh my gosh, bugger. So we called up a friend of ours, and he worked in Soho as a production guy. And he said, well, it's funny enough. I'm looking out my window now. The studio next door has just chucked out all their old Avid suites and things. Said, just come and borrow that stuff. So we went down. We borrowed the office next to us. We took these trolleys down, supermarket trolleys, pulled all this stuff in, racked it all up in our office. So it looked not dissimilar to this, perhaps about that much anyway. And they came down the Tuesday, and we got the contract. Obviously, half an hour later, we took all the stuff out again, but we carried on, and that's how we grew, and we spent a lot of the time winging it. So we did that for like 4 years, and then we sold it, and then we just thought, actually, we want to do something tangible. And it was in 2002, that was the first sort of sign of Bremont starting, and we told our wives that we had this really good idea about setting up a watch brand, and they just, we weren't allowed to mention the word brand back then. We're going to set up this watch company, and they just thought we're absolutely mad. Because we did tell them at the time, which is a big mistake, that would be a year and a half till our first watch was ready. And actually, 5 years later, we're still going. It's not going to be far away. But it was a massive market. Our view was, it's a multi-billion-dollar market. People did think we were crazy. If you think 20 years ago, the smartwatch was just coming out, just about, and people were saying, why on earth are you getting into mechanical watches? The mechanical watch industry was all but destroyed in the 70s with the quartz revolution. And Giles and I said, yeah, but we love them, and there's an amazing history, which I'll talk about in a minute, of the UK, and actually, if you have 1%, 2% of this incredible market, you'll have a really lovely business. And that was our view. It was as simple as that. We're incredibly passionate about it, and that was enough to sort of drive us forward. Plus, we didn't have a father figure telling us not to do it. I think that's probably helped. So if you go back to British watchmaking, there's actually an incredible history. So we think Swiss, don't you? You think watches, you think Switzerland. But if you go back 200 years, we were leading the whole sort of watchmaking revolution. Half the innovation in any mechanical watch, doesn't matter what mechanical watch you're wearing, would have come from British shores. The world sets its time by Greenwich, and that's for a very good reason. We're making all the ship's chronometers. So back in 1707, interesting bit of history, the British Navy lost 2,000 sailors in one accident off the Scilly Isles when they're coming back from battling the Spanish, and they all got lost, thought they'd go up the channel, and they ended up being smashed on the rocks in the Isles of Scilly. And that's because they didn't know where they were. And the problem at navigation at sea, have ever you seen a film or read the book Longitude? It's actually, most books on watchmaking are a bit dull, but this is actually, it reads like a thriller. It's actually a very, very good book. And it's all this concept of latitude you could decipher quite quickly using celestial objects, stars, sun. Longitude, you needed time. But time at sea was really hard. All the clocks are sort of pendulum-based, and it was a chap called John Harrison. You're all too young to have watched Only Fools and Horses, but he makes his money in the end by finding one of the original John Harrison clocks in his garage. But that was it's about the size of a dinner plate, and he was a carpenter from Yorkshire, but an incredible engineer, and he designed this clock which could tell the time, within 2 or 3 seconds crossing the Atlantic, which changed everything. It used a big spring rather than pendulum. I can go on for hours and bore you silly, but it was an amazing. So then, the power of going back now, we don't have it, but the power of the British at sea was all down to ship's chronometers. So the British Navy could navigate around the world where a lot of other nations couldn't. Quarter of the value on any ship was the clock itself. So you go down, because it's so expensive, you go down to Greenwich and you'd rent the clock for a particular, adventure or mission, whatever you're off to do. And they'd all be calibrated there in Greenwich. So that's where the only chronometers were made. And so the word chronometer came from Greenwich originally. Which is what I just talked about there. That was that's what it looked like, the first ever ship. But he's an amazing guy. And it is worth a read, Longitude. It's a very, very good book. I put this up because it just makes me laugh. You can imagine, us, again, this conversation with our wives, again, the whole thing about, we don't really know, we're not watchmakers. It's going to cost a lot to get into this because the barriers to entry are actually quite heavy in watchmaking if you're going to do it properly. We didn't know anything about retail, really. We had no people really wanting to work with us. And I just thought Musk must have thought the same thing when he tried to launch this car into space. How hard can it really be? But it is difficult. And we had to go to Switzerland and we had to talk to companies. For example, a big movement manufacturer at the time was a company called Etta. And 25 years ago, I remember sitting in one meeting and they genuinely, I thought it was actually quite rude, they generally just started laughing at us. Charles and I look at each other, is this because they think we're great, or they just no, they're generally just laughing at us. And they just said, there's no way, what are you thinking about? You're mad. But it was, there was this real desire, and Giles, that actually made us more and more keen to sort of prove them wrong. And we did our best to get on with everyone. We set up a little workshop in Bienne in Switzerland. We hired 4 watchmakers, and we learned. It was all just by experimenting, and we'd design a watch, and then we're trying to test it as much as we could, and this is where that 5 years came into it. It took us 5 years to are really sure that we were happy to sell a piece of a watch, because you can't go back. And quality has you can have the your best marketing in the world, but if you don't have that product there, you're on a hiding to nothing. You get one chance. And you can't sort of release something, okay, the next time it's going to be better, unless you're the only player in the market. When the competition is so stiff, it has to be really good first time. So we went out there, and we learned a huge, huge amount. And a lot of it was by trial and error, but we met some great Swiss guys who were willing to help us. And it was then, over time, we started bringing it back to the UK. This is our mission. I mean, it sounds bit naff, doesn't it, have a mission? But actually, it did mean a lot to us, and it sort of led to a few pillars for the brand, which I can talk about in a minute. But it was this fact that we were going to do it in the UK. That was absolutely key, and that really did differentiate us from all the other brands out there. There are a couple of artisanal watchmakers in the UK, but we wanted to compete with the Amigas, the IWCs, all these bigger brands. And for us, a big part of the brand was actually getting this community behind us, which were willing to come along with the adventure with us. We were the first, I'd say, luxury watch brand, really, to go on social media in a big way, because we had bugger all marketing, dollar, really, and we couldn't put massive, full-page adverts into the Financial Times and things. So we're on Instagram, and we're telling the story or doing this, and it sort of gained momentum quite quickly, because it's seen as rather vulgar from most of the big luxury watch brands and the LVMHs of this world, but now obviously everything's done on that. So this was sort of the key for us, as I was saying at the beginning. We weren't fashion, because clearly you can tell that, but it was not about a fashion watch. It was about a watch which, for us, is about the engineering. So that had to be absolutely critical. The marketing could come later, and we loved all that side of things as well. But it was really, really important that we got that bottom bit right first. And I think fashion is hard, if you just love it and you know it and you can live and breathe it, then that's one thing. We weren't those people. So it had to be about the product and the engineer of that product. I talked earlier about the barriers to entry, and for us, as the company got bigger, it got harder and harder. And I think if you want to be a sort of niche little brand, that's one thing, and you outsource everything, and you're saying, I'm going to sell 500 watches a year, that's fine. Very quickly, the business spirals out of control if you're not careful. If you think about every watch you sell, you need spare parts. You need to have a guarantee for 10, 20 years. You need to have, it goes on and on. So we're designing the product. Giles and I designed every single watch. It was something we're really passionate about. We're also an engineering company, which I'll show you a video in a minute. We were machining down to 2 microns, the parts. So a human hair is 50 to 60 microns. And you're machining these parts down to there. So you had to really know what you were doing. And we're doing movements, we're doing cases, we're doing all these little things. So it was really hard. You're then having to put all the parts together to make the watch. So you've got rows of apprentices that you've trained up. So where do you find watchmakers in the UK? You can't. So you have to train them up, so we had to go through all this process. You're a retailer. We had 15, 20 of our own stores dotted around the world. And then you're selling through a lot of, the Watch of Switzerland and these sort of places as well. And then finally, you can have the best product in the world, but if you can't market it, then they'll just sit there on the shelf. And conversely, if you're marketing them brilliantly and the product doesn't sort of stack up. So if any one of these is out of sync, you're in trouble. And that's what the barriers to entry for us became. And as we got bigger, we could see, cash. We had tens of millions of pounds of stock and things like this. And so you forget all this when you start the business. So as we grew, we realized we had to have more investment. Would have loved the business to always have been just Giles and I, but quite quickly we realized, without getting a divorce very quickly from our wives, and because earlier on we were getting them to sign paperwork, mortgaging their house the second time without them really realizing what they're saying. There's only so many times you could do that. So this is the biggest barrier. But these are the three pillars we came up with. This is really important for us. We kept three, so my brother would remember them. But it was, the British bit, which we've talked about, was absolutely key. Military, which I'll talk about in a minute, was big, and then the venture side. And these still sort of ring true today for the brand as well. It's a British bit. Won't go too much into that. We talked about this, but this is, the apprentices. I mean, it was really hard to get watchmakers up to scratch. So we're having to sponsor the British School of Watchmaking. We're having to bring people over from Switzerland to train up other people and get this sort of self-fulfilling skills revival. But we did, and you had to sort of sit down and go, actually, how long is this going to take? It wasn't like the current government, for example, or any government in this country, thinking 2 years ahead. You had to think sort of 10 years ahead because you're investing in some pretty hefty machinery. And this thing, it was sort of sums it up quite well, this bottom sort of sentence, but it is frustrating. But then if you don't make that effort to invest in the manufacturing, who isn't? Where's the innovation going to come for the future? And we did stuff in the UK, which even the Swiss weren't doing. We were machining from bar. People were using stamping out metal, for example, in Switzerland, Germany, where we were machining straight from bar. And that's because you worked with Rolls-Royce Aerospace for a long time. And they said, why don't you do this? And we were learning a huge amount from other industries and from some of the other partners we were working with. Sorry, that was slightly over-dramatic music. That was a film we did literally about 10 years ago. But so the military side of our business was an amazing sector. It probably ended up being a third of our business. So we did several hundred military units around the world. And it was, for them, as an heirloom. It was, I'm part of this Special Forces unit, RAF squadron, military squadron, and I suppose in the olden days you get a tattoo with your regiment. Now it is, the watch, and I'd flown this airplane or this airplane, and people just collected them, and it became a really great marketing thing. So all of our marketing became based on real events. So very few sort of stage photographs. It was, you had some amazing people in spy planes and doing some incredible things. And then we teamed up with companies like Martin Baker very early on. Fascinating company. Again, it's real stories. So the authenticity of a brand is very much entrenched in sort of the marketing you put out there. So the Martin Baker, amazing company, we know Andrew Martin very well, he's sort of a mate, and we chatted to him, we said, look, at the moment you eject from an aircraft, they've been going since 1946, and they invented the ejection seat. They saved over 7,500 lives to date. You've seen a lot of them recently in the last week or two, sadly. But they do several hundred air forces around the world. If you eject, you get a ejection tie and a badge, and the tie, it looks like it's going to catch on fire at any moment. It's not a great tie. And we said to them, look, you should really get a watch or something. He said, this is great. So we designed this watch, which would go through the same testing as the seats themselves. So vibration, shock, temperature, all that sort of fog, all that sort of stuff. And but it became an incredible platform because all of the footage we get from the testing, we could then use for marketing, which was very, very powerful. Adventure was a big part because very early on, Giles and I, we built the watch and we were sitting there in Switzerland, we're going, blimey, we just don't know. Is this going to survive a weekend? Is it going to survive a weekend of surfing or whatever? We just didn't know. So very early on, for example, Bear, back in his early days, was wearing on his shows, Charlie Borman, Ewan McGregor on The Long Way Down, Kenton Cool climbing Everest for the 8th and umpteenth time, Ben Saunders on his solo. So we worked with these amazing people who are documenting the use of these watches. Again, it was real stuff. And it sort of grew from there, really. So that became a very easy, marketable pillar of the brand, which I just said there. So for me, in my mind, in terms of setting up a brand, what makes a brand work? I think you've got to have a story there. You've got to, it's got to be authentic. It can't be, and this is why I think so many large groups that buy brands often fail with them, because suddenly the authenticity of the brand disappears. And I think people want, especially now, it comes down to how do you define luxury. For me, it's craftsmanship, it's exclusivity, it's all these sort of things and it's seeing, my brother and I are involved with another brand I'll tell you about in a minute, but seeing them make these pens or whatever you were making is so special. So the authenticity for me is really, really important. And that's what, for me, it attracts a lot of people to a brand. The product, goes without saying, it has to be amazing. No corners cut there. And then to build a brand, obviously you need a group of people who are sort of living and breathing the same as you. And I think that's a community. And when you've got all those three working together well, then you can, I think, safely say, actually, I've got a bit of a brand developing. But again, if one of those is missing, that's my view, then it becomes harder. So what we did very early on, which not many brands are doing, a lot of brands are saying, right, I've done this watch, it's round, it's got 3 hands, that's great, and it's made in Switzerland. We weren't Swiss, so Britain wasn't really a watchmaking country at the time. What were we going to talk about? So we sort of, as I was saying, I remember this in the bath, actually. I was in the bath and we came up with this watch here, and this was 20 years ago, and we said, look, why don't we, there's a very, very famous Spitfire, which, incredible history, and we talked to the owner, and we ended up integrating parts of this very famous Spitfire, Battle of Britain, et cetera, in this watch, and that sold incredibly well. But what it allowed, and this one, for example, here, top right, was done with Bletchley Park, where it's got original parts of an Enigma machine built into it. It's got wood from Alan Turing's hut. It's got H1, this is HMS Victory. It had original wood which was on the deck of the Battle of Trafalgar. But we did limited editions. We didn't make the whole brand about that. We made 300 watches a year about that. And often when you talk to people about Bremont, they go, oh, because you did the Victory watch, or you did this watch, or... but it wasn't about that. It was more about this amazing ability for then journalists who had been used to saying, yeah, this watch is round with 3 hands, it's great. Actually, that became this much of the press release, and the rest was, this is done with the Royal Navy. It's, part of Nelson. It's part of this. It's part of, Victory. It suddenly becomes so much easier for them to talk about. So and no other watch brands at the time were really doing that. You had a bit of, you did have people talking about this watch has been here, it's been to the top of this, but actually in terms of the watch itself, it became much easier. This one here, for example, is quite fun. It had original fabric from the 1903 Wright Flyer, which was amazing. So Orville and Wilbur, the first aircraft that ever flew. So, and then more and more crazy things started happening. You know, we did things with lots of cool projects. And then we had partnerships, which again, genuine partnerships, which had a story behind each one. So Martin Baker, we talked about. Williams, we're working with their industrial and their engineering teams. They had very similar machines to us, so we're helping them. We made some of the parts of Formula One cars. Rolls-Royce Aerospace, we built some of the parts in that record-breaking aircraft up there. They helped us with new metal concepts. So there was a lot going on there. And then others were slightly more, obvious marketing. And then obviously big things, which are very easy. You have to still go for that side of things. So Kingsman and other bits made a huge difference to the brand overnight. But, it's not without its stresses and strains. The biggest issue we had as we grew, cash flow became harder and harder. I said stock is an enormous part, and just having the infrastructure around the whole brand. We built this new facility, a 45,000 square foot facility, which you can still go and see today in Henley. Cost a lot of money running this place. And as you get bigger, you do have, tricky shareholder conversations. You get more investment, and they'll say, we want to go like this. You're saying, yeah, but you've got to, as I come back to earlier on, brand is this living organism. If you're not careful, you can make the wrong decision. You come across as too commercial. You'd make a mistake with the actual product itself. But having said all this, I sat down with my brother the other day and we said, look, would you go back and do the whole thing again, 22 years of what we've done? And it was in a flash. It's been the most fun. Honestly, we're talking about clock watching. The time has just gone so incredibly quickly. And we'll do it again in a flash. But I think, the whole entrepreneurial thing, I think if you get up in the morning and you generally like a bit of excitement and you like a bit of risk, it's the best thing, honestly. I think you do have to have that slight propensity for risk. If you're sort of nervous about whether the next bill's going to be paid and that sort of thing, early on it's quite hard. But when you do see this thing nurture and you see it grow, there's nothing else like it. It's amazing. But, how do you get that? There is, in our team, I put this, it just makes me laugh. My daughter found this image. But it's sort of the Emperor's New Clothes thing. Everyone we've employed, every organization Giles and I have ever worked, got going, we've always wanted that complete honesty within our team, from us. It's played a huge part. And you want to be able to sit in a meeting, board meeting or a management meeting, and someone to say to you, no, I don't agree. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's going to work. And we had a great marketing girl who'd say, Giles and I was coming up with these mad ideas, and she'd say, no, I don't think that's a good idea, or that's brilliant. But often it's the no's which really, really help. And so this whole thing about candor is really, really important, I believe, in terms of building a brand. We then had this thing, we talk going back to Musk and his innovation. You do need to innovate. You have to do things differently. What's going to differentiate you, again, from your competition? And we've never made a decision really based on a return on investment. We've never gone, God, if we can make this is going to lead there. Often it's come the other way around. So Giles and I, excuse my French here, but FIF, we always talked about the FIF, and that was the Fuck It Fund. And we had this amount of money Giles and I would use, which you wouldn't necessarily sit down and go through a whole board meeting talking about it. It was squirreled away, and we'd go and do crazy stuff with it. We'd come up with flare watches that did launch this and this. And that's what allowed us to do a lot of the crazy stuff we managed to do and grow the band. But it was very, very important to us. I think, this is the whole thing about you've just, if you do everything based on return on investment and financial sense, you probably won't be building a brand in the first place. These are just a few of my pearls of wisdom for the whole the journey we've had. We had this amazing FD I was talking about earlier on, Fiona, we'd done our budget, we spent ages doing this budget, this is great, and she said, no, that's all wrong. I said, what do you mean? She said, 3 times rule. So what's this 3 times rule? She said, I think everything's going to take 3 times longer. It's going to be 3 times harder, and it's going to cost 3 times more than you think. Oh, come on. Well, so I had this whole debate. Sure enough, she's bang on. So if you're ever setting up a business, using this rule invariably works. It really, really does, because there's so many things you don't think about. This was the facility we ended up building in Henley, which was great because it was a proper showcase, and you could go in there, you could see Formula One cars, you could see, watchmakers building these, and it's, if you ever want to have a tour, it's still there. Is a proper home for British watchmaking, which we're incredibly proud. That was the more Parts of the Caribbean theme track. That one is. And then the story for Giles and I at Bremont sort of ended really a sort of couple of years ago. In the guise that we were sort of day to day, we're obviously still founders, still involved a bit, but we eventually sort of got bought out by a chap called Bill Ackman, who you may or may not know. He's a very big American activist investor, loved the brand, bought a lot of the watches, effectively bought the company. So he's heavily involved now. These are some of the memories along the way. But no, it's been one hell of a journey, and it's been the most thing for me. Life is incredibly short. Giles and I talk about it a lot. As I said, our wives think it's ADHD, but I don't think it is. I think it's just this genuine, we don't spend any of our time not doing something we want. And I think for us, doing our own thing and having our own business allowed us to do that. So, yeah, there you go. And to continue with the love of British engineering, we were approached a couple of years ago by this girl, her father, that owned Filofax as a family, and underneath that various brands. And one of the brands that she had been involved with running was a company called Yard Lead. And Yard Lead is it's a 200-year-old British pen brand, Birmingham-based. Amazing history, invented the propelling pencil. There used to be several hundred pen brands in Birmingham. And they're all sterling silver. You go back there, it's like walking through some Peaky Blinder film set. You go up and the jewelry quarter of Birmingham, and these incredible artisanal silversmiths making these amazing pins. So Giles and I ended up buying this business and injecting more life into it. So just building a new factory at the moment, or converting one in the jewelry district, and little store in Piccadilly Arcade. If you ever Piccadilly, go up there, have a drink. There's a little bar upstairs, free for alcohol. Go up and have a drink and make yourself at home. But it's wonderful to see. And again, it's about getting apprenticeships going and building this brand. And we absolutely love it. It's sort of Bremont without the sort of the stress of the later years of building a big brand. But it's really exciting. So we're loving that. So parting wisdom. Yeah, we started. We knew we had this passion, so we went off and did it. You don't know. You have a good idea because I think you're just going to be so incredibly stubborn that it's going to succeed. But nothing's forgiven. We love something. So many brands now are very transitionary. You build a brand, and a year or two later, it's yesterday's. Yesterday's news. And for us, Bremont, we didn't know how long it would last. It's 25 years old now. I think with its new investors, I suppose, behind it, hopefully be here for another 25 years. Yardled's been here 200 years, and that's a brand where you'll talk to a friend and you go, Yardled, I know that. And he'll run upstairs and he'll bring down a pen his grandmother had, a pen his mother had, and one that he had given his wife for their wedding. So it's quite an interesting, and that for me is a really important. And I think it's, I don't think we should forget this. It's almost something that brands thought about in the past and they don't now. And I think it's very important that we keep that going. And I think now, and Bremont, for Yardled, it's about doing it slowly to make sure that it's going to carry on being here for the next 200 years. So that ones that endure is very, very important. But I feel I have probably waffled on for long enough, and I just wondered if there's any questions at all that anyone would like to answer. Yes. Oh, no, thank you.
Thank you.
You mentioned you had some near failures as well.
Yeah.
Would you be open to sharing them and how you weathered the storm?
Yeah, no, we had a few major ones. One of which was obviously COVID. You're suddenly got this big. We'd just built this, and COVID hit, and actually we hadn't quite finished it. So the stresses of having this massive outlay, you're not allowed to build watches. So in the end, you just find a way around. And if you go in there's rooms with positive air pressure, air filtration, this, and we just had to space everyone out and make sure and convince authorities and everyone else that this was a safe work environment. Supply chain, we all know the global supply chain became a complete nightmare. So that was quite scary. So every time you had a conversation with one of your mates, they go, I had the best weekend. Barbecue, the sun was shining, no work, furlough, and there's me ringing up the bank, trying to get loans from HSBC, who are amazing. And, it's a very different existence for us, but we got through it. Other examples would be, what's a sort of scary one? Yeah, when we did that watch with the original parts of the Wright Flyer in, Giles and I wanted to put, this is before making our own movement. Eventually, a few years ago, we ended up producing our own movement in a watch, which was a huge undertaking. It was, you're making all the main plates, bridges, all these sort of things in this country had never been done before. Before that, we're working with Swiss companies like La Joux-Perret, which is a well-known brand. I went to them and said, listen, we want a unique movement for us. It has to be this. And we worked with another watchmaker in the UK, a very well-known watchmaker, and we started doing this. And we did it, and it came out in the press, and some bright spark said, actually, that looks very similar to this other movement, and that La Joux had done, but not talked about. And it did look the same, but it was quite different inside. But the problem is, as soon as that press hit, everyone remembers the bad press. They don't give you a chance to answer. So that actually, people sort of, and it was the terminology, that's it. Giles used, in one interview, used the terminology, this is our first in-house movement. And he should have said, this is our first, he should use a different phrase. But, it was down to terminology, but it really, shocked us how people could be so, they just want to see you sort of fail. So we got through it, and I think that was a great lesson in terms of, we can't just rely on these people to do this for us. We've got to do this ourselves. So it pushed us to do all this. But my gosh, it was a scary year or so when, But there's lots of other, cash flow, as I said, all that sort of stuff keeps cropping up.
I'm a banker, so.
Oh yeah, perfect. Well, we should have chatted before. That'd be.
Thank you so much for the talk, Nick.
No,
I'm very much inspired by you. I have two questions.
Yes.
I am someone who reads horology as well.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I'm not a good collector. I am like Bremont, but I started collecting some quartz and some mechanical as well. Just wanted to let you know that. But again, my question is we have three big players, right? Like British watchmaking, or like Swiss and German, as well as Japanese.
Yeah, Japanese.
So what's the one thing from each of the movements or makings you have learned from, rather than British making?
So the Japanese are very understated, but very good.
Yeah.
So you buy a Grand Seiko, and there's a lot of watch for the money. German I love because they are they're less mainstream, but just quite a Lange and also Lang & Song, a brand like that is just quite cool.
IWCs.
Yeah, and IWC, although that is Swiss, but it's Swiss. Yeah, it's all. And then the Swiss are just very. I mean, I don't know if you've been around the Swiss, but they're just a completely different race in terms of. You go out there, they're so into, and this is one thing we should really learn about in this country. You'll see engineering company after engineering company. And so I did this rally this year, and I was driving from Peking to Paris, and you go through China, and you'll see whole cities that there's 1,000 robotics companies, or 1,000. Switzerland isn't that different. You go to La Chaux-de-Fonds, you go to Neuchâtel, or you go to Bienne, or wherever, and they'll have lots of these companies making stuff. But these companies have been passed down through generation, and I'm as guilty as anyone in this company, because we end up getting too complex in the end with Bremont. But they stay in the generations, and they invest, and they keep it going. And I think that's one thing we could really learn from in this country, because then that expertise gets passed down. But the Japanese I think are massively understated and quite cool. Yes.
Thank you. Super interesting. I had two questions. The first thing I was wondering about is, do you remember when you first decided to start Bremont, what you would do in the first couple of weeks or first couple of months? How did you get started? And then the second thing I was wondering about is, what was your experience being bought out?
Yeah.
Have any advice for, I guess, those who were helping you, so with the commercial due diligence, with the lawyers, on how they best could have helped you? Or could have done better?
Yeah, no, two very good questions. So very early on, you're just spending your time trying to figure out, having something down on a piece of paper or a PowerPoint for your business is one thing. The best thing you can do with any business is not be afraid, just go and have some conversations. Like the one we got laughed out of the room, and we literally laughed out of the room, is so incredibly useful. And we did a lot of those. So the first 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 months, it was all about just meeting people. And then you go, right, and you tear up that business plan and go, right, that's not going to work. We're going to have to do X, Y, and Z. And don't be afraid of knocking on doors. That's the big thing. And you have a much better idea. In terms of the selling out process, we'd have been invested in various guises over the last 10 years. Funnily enough, all American money, people who had loved the brand and invested. We were very lucky, I feel, our CEO at the end, before the new one, he was incredible. He's a bright guy, but he was very, very good at the corporate finance side of things. So valuation-wise and due diligence-wise, and he was very good at. I would definitely recommend everyone gets that proper vault with all the information in there properly and everything watertight and warranties and all that sort of stuff. You never know when that can come back and. But it's very emotive as well. You spent 25 years building something, and suddenly you see them, right, we're going to change the logo, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And you have to be mentally, I mean, I think my family just thought, what's going on with Dad? He's a bit weird at the moment. But you're not, you feel you're slightly going through mourning because you've lived and breathed something for so long. So that's why we immersed ourselves in the next thing, not necessarily because we needed to, but because we wanted to. So does that answer any of your question?
Yeah.
Are you sure? Okay. So,
Thank you for your presentation.
no, pleasure.
Very helpful. So I'm also coming from a finance background.
I could have done with all you guys a while back.
Just for context, so today raising money is much harder, generally speaking, than
Yeah.
it was 10, 25 years ago.
Do you think it is?
Based on, I think, consensus, from the sense that there is a lot more money, but there's just a much more difficult process you have to go through.
Yeah.
You have to, if you're a founder, you have to show a lot more discipline. They want you to really be nuanced and explain how you're going to use money. So that, what do you call it, your burn rate.
Yeah.
Disciplined. So there's a lot of scrutiny on that. And the other one is, I think the other consensus reason is there is also a lot more pressure to invest in ideas that will actually exit
Yeah.
within certain timelines. Yeah. So anyway, that's one of the macro trends happening. So from a perspective of if you were to be starting today, not 25 years ago, right, in this climate which is very difficult, can you please speak to how much you would spend, right? Like how much you spent on Bremont relative to if you were forced to be more disciplined and to be more accountable, and what that would look like.
So, I think when you start a business, you've got to decide very early on, I think, what are you doing it for? And are you doing it, building up to sell it in 5 years' time? Are you building up, no, I want to give it to my kid. Giles and I didn't build Bremont up with a view to selling it, funnily enough, early on. Later on, we thought, it's time to sell because it's got so complex and there's so many people involved. I think, obviously, hindsight is a very powerful thing. I think a lot of money, we talked about the fifth fund. Won't say that again. But, a lot of things that work, that don't work. I think if I was doing it again now, I think it's harder now. I think we hit a window which was perfect. No one else is doing it. Now there's a lot of sort of smaller micro brands trying to do it. So, and there's a lot of noise out there. In terms of money spent, again, it's quite hard to. I think you'd find it quite hard to go to a PE house or something like that and say, listen, we want 50 million to do this, until you've proven yourself first. So I can't help but think you'd have to go through all of the earlier stages. I don't think we did anything wrong. I think everything we did grew the brand. And so if I was doing it again, would I make the same investment decisions? Yes, I would. Minus a couple of small things that we would have probably not done. But, I mean, for example, that building there, we would, there's a big thing, Geneva Watch Fair. Or in our day, it was the Basel Watch Fair. You'd spend, and I know the brand is doing it now, but you'd spend an awful lot of money, like millions, being there. And what Giles and I said, look, this is the Swiss Watch Fair. Why on earth? We're not going to spend all that money and do that. Think outside the box. So every time we did so, we started off with a London townhouse, and we said, no, you're trying to get retailers, and you're trying to get, and then we did it here, but retailers, and you're trying to get press. Instead of flying out and trying to build a stand as big as this room with everyone it's a sort of bit of a sort of slightly big dick exercise. Everyone's trying to be I'm more impressive. And you can't beat a Patek or a Rolex because that's like going to a whole village. There's no point trying to do that. So just change it, put it on its head and say, actually, you come to us. We'll pay for flights, come over and see us in our home. And it would cost us a couple $100,000 to do that rather than millions. And you got a lot more return from it because they saw you in your own environment. So you just got to think outside the box and don't be afraid of going swimming up, upriver when everyone else is going the other way. I really wouldn't worry about that. I know I probably haven't answered your question, but it's a really hard one to answer because, I think we'd have to keep going through the same stages we did. I don't see how you've done it differently. And I think if you grow like this, you get some brands that they're like, everyone on the internet, the new micro brand, everyone's got this dial and this is fantastic. You can bet your bottom dollar 2 years' time they're not going to be there. Because you can't keep that hype going and innovate unless you've got the backbone to the business at the same time. I don't believe anyway. Sorry.
Right, thank you. So thank you so much for the inspiring talks.
No, pleasure.
I'm a PhD student in materials, so recently I'm thinking to create a startup about a new material.
Yes.
And in order to get that, I need to find someone good at mechanics, someone good at business. I mean, I don't have a very beautiful and inspiring stories like you. And I mean, I don't know
it's a lot better.
the quality of the new materials, and of course I don't know about the community. I mean, it can be huge, but at first we don't know what community it is. So what's your suggestions for the technology startup brand? Is it something very big, or we can change the brand we have the second version product? Thank you.
If I was you,
Yeah.
I'd go and talk to the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre up in Sheffield, which is an incredible success story. And they were formed on the old slag heaps of coal mines of Sheffield. And two amazing guys got together and built this thing with funding from Boeing, Jaguar and other people. And they have 400 odd students, apprenticeships up there, and it's all about material science. It's fascinating, but they're very commercial. So when we did the watch and we had a new type of stuff, I can't remember now, it's so long ago, 486 steel or something. It was a new steel which was used in the undercarriage of the F-18 Hornet. And it's very strong because when they hit the deck, and it was very hard, it was all this stuff. So all the material work on that metal was done with Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, AMRC. So they were fascinating. I'd go and talk to them because they're very commercial as well, and they're trying to commercialize everything. I'd go and talk to someone like that if I was in your shoe, and go and ask to have a look around. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
No, but go and have a look at that. They're an amazing facility. And they're growing, and they've got huge amounts of government funding as well. And there's some really interesting people to talk to. And amazing.
Great, thanks.
Did I answer? I hope I answered. Sorry.
So you made very much luxury items at what was probably one of the more reasonable price points in regards to the product that you're manufacturing. But there's been a distinct change in technologies, which means that people get what you said, quartz.
3D printing or whatever, yeah.
Do you think that there's, and now you've moved into still I'm going to call it a heritage business, but with a similar sort of technological problem, I would say. Do you think there's still a place in the wider world for precision, well-made, well-engineered products?
Definitely. I mean, it's just, I'm trying to see if anyone's got a pen. Nearly. If you write 15 minutes a day, the probability of having dementia decreases massively in the older people. The gifting, I think just having an item which has a bit of longevity about it and is special, I think there's going to be a demand for that. I think, price point, I think people are willing to pay for something which is generally beautifully made, and they'll carry on doing that as long as it doesn't just go down the fashion line. We have, you can sell pens for tens and tens of thousands of pounds, or you can sell pens for £500, and people are still willing to pay that. The same with watches. And for us, the whole pen market is very similar to the watch market. It's funny enough, if you talk to watch forums or you talk to pen forums are where the watch forums were 20 years ago. And people are very excited about it because it's still, if you think about Middle East, everyone wears, very similar clothes. They've got an amazing watch and they'll have a pen, and that's what differentiates people. So, but it's all about how that pen's made, how it's. So I think there's a huge opportunity to do that, to make something that lasts and people to carry on buying. I really do, and we've seen it. I mean, yard lead's grown 3 or 4 times in the last year, just by doing the right thing and telling people about the story and allowing people to come and have a look. And I mean, some people aren't into it, and you're never going to appeal to all. You know, a lot of people go, I just don't care. It's not of interest to me at all. I've got my iPhone. But other people, the most precious things to me are the things that my father's given me over the years, or things that were his. And that's the same with some of these luxury items. So, yeah. Hiya.
So my question is, from the branding videos, we can tell that Britishness is kind of part of their cultural DNA. But Bremont, as a global brand, when it comes to a new country, like new market,
Yeah.
how do you make sure the brand DNA and the culture part is translated well in the local market?
That's a very good question.
And also, what strategies do you really take when the brand comes to a new market?
So we've had some real successes, and we've had some real failures with markets, funnily enough. So America was a success. I think it's very easy to transfer, the language and everything else. Our biggest failure, funnily enough, was China. The reason being is we built this amazing store in the middle of Shanghai, right at the middle of COVID, or just the beginning of COVID. So we couldn't go out there for 3 or 4 years, which was a disaster. That wasn't our fault. But what was our fault is we had an agency look at, but this time we got bigger, agency look at China as a market for us and saying, look, do you think Bremont will succeed? And they did a case study, and they took a sample of people, and they asked people what they'd think. And it came back, yeah, they love British luxury, it's going to work. But actually, the reality of the situation is you've had big luxury brands, watch brands, luxury groups marketing to the Chinese market for 40, 50 years in terms of what constitutes a luxury watch. And that's Swiss. Even German watches don't really sell, Japanese watches don't sell that well in China. It's all Swiss, because they've done an incredibly good job indoctrinating, the population in terms of what makes a luxury watch, which is fine. And as a brand, I think it's very hard to believe, to think that you can try and change that mentality, especially with your budget. You can't. It's impossible. You might sell a few, and we sold a few, but we lost a lot of money doing that. And I think unless you're part of a bigger group, or your story is slightly different, and you're not, again, that's where swimming against the tide doesn't work. But the other markets, we went in a smaller way, and we built them up organically, and they worked. So we're in about 20 different countries. But again, it's the 80-20 rule. 80% of your sales came from 20% of the countries you're in, really. So does that help?
Oh, yes, very much.
Thank you. Hiya.
Probably just piggyback on the new market perspective. If you enter the new market, how long will you make decision whether this will work for the long term or not? And what are the key determining factors in that?
It depends how scary the figures are. China, I think we should have probably stayed a bit longer, but we give it normally 3 years. First, so New York, we've got a store. We have the store. Brand has a store in Madison Avenue, and the first year was tough. Second year, a chunk, bit better, and then the third year it worked. So you have to give it time, but then there's a whole infrastructure you have to put around the brand when you go into a new market. You have to, it's not just PR and marketing. It's all the concierge, it's the store manager, and you've got to take all these things into account. A store manager in America in a store, a simple boutique, is paid $150,000 a year. And you think, bloody hell, and in the UK, you'd be paying a lot less. And when you first go into market, all these questions you forget to ask, and so your budget suddenly looks crazy. But then you realize, as a market, the Americans have a lot more money than the Brits, so they they'll go and go, yeah, I like that one. I'll have that colour as well, and that one. And it's a different mentality. So it takes probably 2 or 3 years, I'd say 3, to give it a go. But you have to, you have to be quite brave at times. And some markets, yeah. I think for us, Asia was difficult. I've got a mate who runs Brompton bikes, and Asia's flown for them because the concept of, British luxury is great. That's a big tick. Think of Aston Martin, Rolls-Royce, think of Jag, all these amazing brands. Fortnum Masons, Harrods, people, they love Brit stuff, and they love the fact that Brompton was the sort of first fold-up bike that really, really worked, and they do incredibly well out there. But we were swimming against a tide, which is the Swiss watch tide, which we didn't really anticipate. So there's all these little things. I mean, you could do, a whole master's on what not to do. I've got, So, is it? Yeah, of course.
Where does the name come from?
So the name, very quickly. So that's a very good point. So our surname is English. So having a British watch brand called English, I think the irony would have been lost on a few people. And we're very, very lucky as kids when we grew up. Our dad had this amazing propensity for allowing us to take, risk really. So I remember I was 18, Giles would be 16, and we were obviously doing a lot of flying in those days. We lived in a little farm up in Norfolk, and we'd had a little airstrip, and we'd say to my dad, look, I want to go and take this old 1940s airplane to Europe for 3 weeks with Giles. And he'd go, fine, no problem at all. Just make sure you call your mother once a week. So then I'll be a 18-year-old and 6-year-old flying across the channel, a compass, a watch, and a map, no GPS. I can't imagine doing it with my kids. And you get into all sorts of scrapes and things. So that was our life. We did a lot of this. And then when I had the accident, Giles said, we've got to get you back up in the air. And I thought, okay. I still had my arm in big sort of metal things. And we got back flying, and we arranged this trip. So let's go and do another tour around, Europe, be a bit of fun. And we never thought of my mother at this time. Poor thing. Can you imagine? Because my brother ended up having a plane crash 10 years later and broke his back. And so anyway, but he's fine now. Anyway, so we went off, and we're flying this old German biplane, 1930s biplane. And we headed off, and we, again, watch, compass, and a map. And this is when was it? This is in 1997 or something like that. And we got lost, pretty much. We knew roughly where we were, but that we couldn't find the airfield. And we knew we had like 5-10 minutes fuel left. So we put this old German biplane down in this French field. And if you do that in England or America, you apologize to the farmer and you buy them a bottle of whiskey or something and you have a chat. In France, it's illegal. So we landed and we thought, oh, bugger, this is going to cost a fortune. And as we landed, this old guy came over in his late 70s and waved at us. And he came over and he said, basically, push your airplane in my barn. So he pushed the airplane in his barn. And we ended up staying with him for 3 or 4 days till the weather got better. And had our father lived for another 30 years, he died in his late 40s, he would have been this guy. He was hilarious. He used to fly gliders. He had a workshop full of old things. And his name was Antoine Bremont. So when it came to naming the brand, for us it meant a huge amount without obviously using your surname. And the other thing you've got to think about when you set up a brand is what's been used, what hasn't been used, and trademarking. So that's where the name came from. But not very British. I pray. So you always have to go, where did Bremont come from? It's like, no.
Nick, thank you so much.
No, pleasure.
Amazing.
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
So, looking out on a sea of potential entrepreneurs, I think we've established...
Do it.
You have to be a bit mad, I'm afraid. You just have to be mad. Because
Passionate.
Obsessive and passionate, but I think what Nick's proved to us all is that if you really believe in something and you're passionate about it and it's authentic, if you've got the grit and persistence, it's an amazing journey, however it ends up. And they all say that the best entrepreneurs serially fail and then learn and get
Yeah,
and
of
keep
course.
going. So I hope you're inspired. I hope you all become entrepreneurs. This world needs entrepreneurs. And if you've got more questions, we're now going to retire to the room next door for drinks. So if you want to nobble Nick and find out any more, we'd be very pleased if you stay on. But thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Nick.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.